Well, hello and welcome to another episode in this series looking at the Durham, Tyne and Wear coastline. We are actually now in the county of Durham, no longer in Tyne and Wear, just south of the city of Sunderland in this coastal town called Seaham. Not to be confused with Seaburn, of course, on the north side of Sunderland, which we saw in the last episode. Seaham is the most northerly town on the Durham coast. When you mention Seaham, most people presume that you are talking about the more modern Seaham Harbour, which is where I'm standing doing this narrative. And when I say modern, I mean about the early 1800s. The much older and original village of Seaham lies at the very northernmost edge of the town and dates back to the Anglo-Saxon period. It is separated from Seaham Harbour by Seaham Dean, a small wooded valley. The etymology of the name Seaham is simple, and it comes from the Anglo-Saxon word ham, meaning a homestead, and in this case it is the homestead by the sea. The Church of St Mary is the only surviving structure of the original village and thought to have been built in the late 600s using Roman cut stones. The church is one of the 20 oldest surviving churches in the UK. The Romans had a presence here in the form of a signal tower, which is where presumably the stones were taken from to build the church. A Roman signal tower would have almost certainly begun as a timber construction when they first arrived, but would have been rebuilt in stone once they had settled and began quarrying from the Magnesian Limestone cliffs here. The first mention of Seaham in any documents is in 933 AD, when it was incorporated into the community of St Cuthbert monks at Chesterley Street. If you recall from last year's series on the Northumberland coast, in the Lindisfarne episode, the monks had fled the island in 875 AD with St Cuthbert's coffin and the Lindisfarne Gospels, fearing another Viking invasion. The monastic community wandered for 7 years looking for a safe place to settle, stopping temporarily at locations in Scotland and Northumberland, but eventually settling in Durham. They came to Chesterley Street around 882 AD, not intending to stay very long, but ended up staying there 112 years. The Vikings sought to expand their kingdom at the end of the 10th century. So once again, the community moved on in 995 AD. Cuthbert's coffin was finally laid to rest in Durham Cathedral, where it is still to this day. Seaham and the surrounding area was an agricultural community with a similar manorial history to the rest of the area. A surviving relic from that period is here at Dalden Tower, Unfortunately, there's locked gates, so we can't get any closer to it. And that, I think that is because it looks to me as though it's crumbling, and I think this is for safety reasons. So we can't get any closer, but at least you can see it there over my shoulder. It was originally a fortified manor house during Seaham's manorial period, built in the 12th century by the Escoland family. Surrounding the manor house would have been the dwellings that the servants lived in who ran the estate. In 1320, a peel tower was added during the years of conflict with the Scottish. The tower fell into disrepair by the 17th century, whereupon it was demolished and the stone was removed and used to build Dalden Hall. What is left of it today is a Grade 2 listed building. And then pretty much nothing of significance happened here to speak of until the late 1700s. In 1790, Sir Ralph Milbank, the 6th Baronet of Holnaby in Yorkshire, built Seaham Hall following his marriage to Judith, the daughter of Lord Wentworth, a British peer. They had one daughter named Anne Isabella Milbank, and it is she that provides the next interesting chapter here in Seaham. Anne Isabella Milbank married the famed poet Lord Byron, Lord George Gordon Byron to give him his full name. How they met, I'm not quite sure, but they married here at Seaham Hall. They had one child, Ada Byron, who became the Countess of Lovelace. The marriage didn't last long, as Byron didn't like Seaham nor his new wife. He wrote the following letter to a friend, and I'll read it to you. Upon this dreary coast we have nothing but county meetings and shipwrecks, and I have to this day dined upon fish, which probably dined upon the crews of several colliers lost in the late gales. The colliers, of course, were the ships that passed up and down this coast carrying coal from Sunderland to London. Byron left Seaham, deserting his wife and daughter just a month after Ada's birth. Like his father before him, he would go on to have many more children to other women, and it seems his artistic notions and continuous philandering wasted much of the estate's wealth. Anne was forced to sell Seaham Hall to Charles Stuart, the 3rd Marquess of Londonderry. It was the Marquess who established the more modern part of the town called Seaham Harbour, and he who provides the next chapter in this story. However, before we look at that next chapter, let me finish the one about Byron. Byron not only left Seaham after his divorce, but left England. I don't want to go too deeply into Byron's life, as that is not my expertise, and whilst it is fascinating to know, it is very protracted and complex. There are many detailed accounts of his life already out there, compiled by far greater experts than me, so I can assure you, you will have fun investigating that. However, for the purposes of this story, it appears his creative impatience and love of the immoral high life followed him across Europe, until his death only 8 years later in Greece after contracting a fever. He became a hero in Greece through his involvement with the Greek people seeking independence from the Ottoman Empire. His wish was to be buried in Greece, but it is written that the Greek people kept his heart and sent the rest of his body back to England to be buried at Westminster Abbey. The Abbey refused to bury him there because of his immoral life, and instead he was buried at the Church of St Mary Magdalene in Hucknall in Nottinghamshire. Anne, his wife, left Seaham and pushed her daughter Ada into mathematics, determined not to have her growing up with her father's perceived insanity. Ada never lost her love for her father though, naming her 2 sons George and Gordon after him. She married William King, and he was made Earl of Lovelace in 1838, making her the Countess of Lovelace. Ada's fame is a result of her studies into Charles Babbage's analytical engine, what you and I today call a computer. So that concludes the Byron chapter, and what followed was the Marquess of Londonderry's chapter, and it's not a particularly good one. He was born in Dublin in Ireland and classed as an Anglo-Irish nobleman. He and his kind, through their imperiousness and grandiosity, were the cause of the Irish people disliking the English. He had a prominent military career in the Napoleonic Wars, but also in the suppression of the Irish Rebellion of 1798 against English rule in Ireland. His second marriage was to Lady Frances Anne Vane in 1819, one of the richest heiresses of the time. He changed his name from Charles Stuart to Charles Vane, keeping the family fortune secure. When Lady Byron was forced to sell up in 1821, Vane acquired all the land around Seaham for a sum of £63,000. That would be the equivalent of just slightly over £5.75 million today. The importance of coal and its export had steadily grown throughout the 1700s, but during the Victorian era of 1820 onwards, it went into overdrive. The already wealthy landowners were only too eager to acquire more wealth, looking for coal beneath their land. Seaham had witnessed many shipwrecks of passing colliers collecting coal from Newcastle and Sunderland, and it was thought that coal was absent from the coastal region of East Durham. How wrong they were, as this region had some of the richest coal seams in England. In 1811, a test sinking was carried out in nearby Haswell, and sure enough, good quality coal was found far beneath the Magnesian Limestone. That started a coal rush in Durham, with the first deep mine opened in Hetton in 1821. The addition of the railways some 20 years later only amplified the growth of the industry. Charles Vane, the Marquess of Londonderry, being the largest landowner hereabouts, was only too keen to exploit the coal under Seaham and add to his already enormous wealth. He approached the commissioners at Sunderland to obtain exclusive rights to the river for exporting his coal. The commissioners refused his request. Being a violent man, he reacted with anger, exclaiming he would see grass growing in the streets of Sunderland before he was done. Of course, that never happened, as Sunderland prospered throughout the forthcoming 2 centuries. In reply, the Marquess instructed the building of the harbour at Seaham and developed the town around it. I think you can probably just see the harbour there off to my left in on the other side of the railings. William Chapman was the architect, with some later input from John Dobson. The first stone was laid by the Marquess himself on the 28th of November 1828, and the first shipment of coal was exported from here in 1831. His increased wealth and power continued to the extent that he instructed the building of the palace at Wynyard Hall near Stockton. Today it is owned by Sir John Hall, the once owner of Newcastle United, back in the era of Kevin Keegan, and the man behind the building of the Gateshead Metro Centre, the huge shopping complex. Sir John only lives in one section of the hall, and the rest is hired out as a prestigious wedding venue and function suite. I had the privilege of filming several weddings there in the past when I had my wedding business. The Marquess is described in many of the accounts I read during my research as a greedy, unfeeling man with little regard for those around him. I met a guy here a few days ago when I was filming the Mary Ann Cotton programme for the Haunted History series, and he said there are 2 statues in Seaham, one to Lord Byron and one to the Marquess. And he said, why do we have to have 2 statues to people we hate? So even today, the people of Seaham don't like to think back to that time that the Marquess had control over this town and the people around here, such as the bad taste that he left behind. Despite his military achievements and his social standing, he left a lot to be desired when it came to social and moral responsibility. If I just digress for a moment, those of you who may have watched episode 8 in the Northumberland Coast series I did last year, you will recall that the Gray family, who maybe, well, certainly weren't quite as wealthy as the Marquess, they always put moral responsibility above privilege. Sadly, that wasn't the case for the Marquess. His total lack of compassion towards the people of Ireland living on his land during the potato famine of 1845 earned him the title of tyrant. His outlook and attitude here in East Durham did nothing to enhance that bad reputation. Parliament passed the Mines and Collieries Act in 1842, which forbade women and girls working underground and introduced a minimum working age of 10 for boys. Lord Ashley reported on the horrendous conditions mine workers were expected to endure, working 12-hour shifts in terrible conditions with no thought to health and safety of the workforce. In order to ensure the bill would get through the House of Lords, he highlighted that girls and young women were working in trousers, bare-breasted in front of the men and boys, and in his own words, an affront to Victorian morality, making them unsuitable for marriage. The Marquess, having a lot of influence in the House of Lords, blocked the Act, quoting that it would make the mines unprofitable. The Act was passed at the third attempt, but in a much watered-down version. Up until 1849, the coal being exported from Seaham Harbour was being brought in from neighbouring collieries at Hetton, Haswell, Merton, Penshaw, Pittington and Rainton. However, in 1849, a shaft was sunk at Seaham and had to reach a depth of 1,819 feet to reach the coal. That's 554 metres and nearly half a mile down. All of Durham's pits, especially the ones near to the east coast, had problems with flooding. One of the characteristics of any limestone geology is underground water. The two are synonymous. The Seaham colliery didn't start producing coal for 7 years, so bad were the flooding and quicksand issues. As production got underway in 1852, a number of explosions occurred due to miners working with naked flames. The deaths occurred despite the safety lamp being in use 40 years prior to this. Once again, the Marquess, trying to maximise profit, hadn't introduced the safety lamps in any of his pits. At Seaham, he was under immense pressure to make the colliery a giant in production, and that was to justify the outlay in getting it working in the first place. By 1854, it had indeed achieved that status, outproducing all the other pits that the Marquess owned, but at the expense of the lives of his workforce. From the very earliest beginnings of mining, noxious gases and explosions were a problem to miners. Some gases were flammable, causing explosions such as methane, and others were gases which choked, such as carbon monoxide. But in order to work deep underground, there needed to be light to see. Early attempts to provide a safe light had been dried fish skins, which provided a bioluminescence. Another method was a jar filled with fireflies, but both were poor at providing enough light to see to work. William Clanny was the first to come up with an idea for a safe light in 1812. He used a candle inside an upturned jar sitting in a trough of water. Air was pumped in to keep the candle alight, but the water prevented contact with any flammable gases. It worked in principle, but was awkward and clumsy to operate. 3 years later, George Stephenson, the inventor and father of the railways, developed the Geordie lamp, and Sir Humphrey Davy developed a similar lamp called the Davy lamp. Both lamps were oil-burning lamps, providing light without the risk of igniting flammable gases, but worked slightly differently. Many of the wealthy mine owners, including the Marquess, continued ignoring the use of these safety lamps well into the late 1850s. Some later accidents were blamed on the lamps malfunctioning, but by the late 1860s, electric lights were being introduced and total safety was achieved. In 1860, Seaham Colliery employed 1,500 men and boys and produced 500,000 tonnes of coal per year. The new town of Seaham had expanded to 3,000 by the 1881 census. John Candlish opened a glass and bottle making plant in Seaham around 1830. On the death of the Marquess, he acquired the lease to the adjacent Londonderry glassworks in 1855 and amalgamated the two into one huge plant. The glass from here was exported to London and all over Europe. The Marquess's son, Frederick, who was altogether a more pleasant man, gave him his patronage. By 1872, the Londonderry Bottle Works, as it was called, was the largest in Europe and occupied 6 sites in Seaham. Seaham Hall was passed down the generations of the family until 1915, when the 6th Marquess gave it to the local authority for the use as a hospital during World War I. It continued as a hospital until 1978, when it was a nursing home before its present-day use as a luxury spa hotel. The collieries began closing in the 1980s after Mrs. Thatcher's ruthless closure programme, which hit the mining communities of East Durham particularly hard. The 3 deep pits at Seaham were the last to close in East Durham. Seaham in 1988, Dordon in 1991 and Vane Tempest in 1993. The very last pit to close in the Durham coalfield was Monk Wearmouth Colliery in Sunderland, now the site of the city's football ground, the Stadium of Light. After the closure of the mines, the whole of the northeast, not just Seaham, went through a period of decline. Families moved away to find work elsewhere, which impacted on local shops and businesses. Things only began to improve when the Nissan car plant opened in 1984, taking thousands of workers from all over the northeast. Others soon followed, offering new work in developing technologies and manufacturing. The town of Seaham today has gone through a revival. There are 1 or 2 famous people born in Seaham. Bob Fox was born in Seaham in 1953, famous for his folk music written about the northeast. Thomas Allen was also born here in 1944, a well-known baritone in the world of opera. Another from the world of music is Martin Brammer. He was born in Seaham and formed a band from Seaham called Cane Gang. His greater achievement was to co-write many songs with the likes of Tina Turner, James Morrison and Ollie Murs, to name but a few. Marion Mitchell, better known by her stage name Janie Jones, was a 60s pop singer born in Seaham. Her claim to fame was for holding sex parties in her London apartment and was later jailed for running a brothel. However, Seaham's most infamous character was one Mary Ann Cotton. Some of you may know who she was, but for those who don't, she is credited with being Britain's first female serial killer. I'm not going to say any more about her in this particular episode, but I have produced a separate programme all about her, and it's part of the Haunted History series. So if you look for that in the playlists section, bit of a tongue twister, look for episode 6 in that series, and you will find all you need to know about the murderous life of Mary Ann Cotton. The beach here has gone through a dramatic transformation. To be precise, Seaham has 3 beaches associated with it, north to south. They are called Seaham Beach, Chemical Beach and Blast Beach. Seaham Beach lies to the north side of the harbour, and that's the one immediately below where I am now. And the other 2 are situated at the southern edge of the town's coastline, separated by a small headland known as Noses Point. Prior to the Victorian Industrial Revolution, this whole stretch of coastline all the way to Hartlepool was known as Frenchman's Cove, due to its connection with it and its history with smuggling. When the quarries opened, followed by the alkaline industries, then the mines, in turn followed by the steel industry, the whole coastline became a dumping ground for industrial waste. The names given to each of the beaches give you a clue as to what waste was dumped on it. Chemical Beach got the waste from the chemical and glassworks. Today the shoreline is littered with jewel-like glass beads due to the sea's weathering action. These are collected and used by local jewellery designers. Blast Beach got the spoil from the steel blast furnace built here in 1862. When that closed in 1907, Dordon Colliery used Blast Beach for dumping its coal waste. There was a huge conveyor situated on gantries which literally took the slag, as it was called, and poured it continuously onto the beach 24 hours a day. In 1992, the beach was used in the filming of Alien 3. It looked so unearthly. Seaham Beach to the north, and again that's the one just below me, didn't have any direct dumping of waste on it, but it got the scum from the other beaches washed in by the tides. Today, all 3 beaches have been restored to their former natural beauty with extensive work and lottery funding. You can once again walk along the beaches and enjoy them as our pre-Victorian ancestors may have done. So I will now leave you to enjoy the views of Seaham, and I'll see you all in a few moments. Well, that's it. The end of yet another episode. If you've enjoyed this, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already done so, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and if you can, go to that blue link at the top of the homepage and make a small donation. It all goes towards the production costs of the film, and it's always gratefully received. So I'm wishing you all the very best of health. Keep watching, keep supporting the channel, and I'll see you all again very soon, but goodbye for now.